Welcome to episode 39 of the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's interview is with Anna Questerly. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. From an indie bookseller and bibliophile turned author, Anna Questerly writes medieval fiction and fairy tales for smart kids and young hearts. For adults, she creates utopian fantasies as A.J. Questerly. So hello, Anna. Is there anything else you would like my listeners to know about you?
Just that I have a bookstore here in Phoenix called Dog-Eared Pages, so if you're ever in the area, make sure to stop in and say hi.
Is that a classic indie bookstore, or is it more of a chain from around there?
It's an indie bookstore. We do new, used, and rare books, a little bit of everything, and we focus our new books primarily on a lot of indie authors, especially authors from Arizona. So it's kind of fun, yeah.
That's very cool. All right, now, do you feel orc or elf today?
Definitely elf. It's Friday.
Awesome. All right, now tell me a little bit about your latest work.
Well, my latest book is Pangea, which is a utopian fantasy. So if you're familiar with 1984 or Hunger Games or Divergent or any of those are dystopian fantasies. Those are obviously worlds you really don't want to live in. So utopian fantasy is just the opposite. Pangea is a world you never want to leave. And it was really fun to write that because every time, Tom came home and he'd start talking politics, I'm like, no, I'm living in Pangea. Don't tell me it doesn't happen here. So it's kind of fun.
Yes, politics have a way of wishing for a utopia. I had noticed that before when I was looking through your stuff that it was a utopian, which really caught my eye because dystopian stuff seems to be very popular right now. What made you want to go in a different route and actually write a utopian world?
Purely escapism. It's one of the main reasons I love to read is I love to escape into other worlds for a while. And I wanted to build a world that I wanted to be in. I definitely didn't want to live in a dystopian universe. And it seems to me we're getting closer every day to so many of the ones that I've read and enjoyed that I just wanted pure escapism for myself as a writer and for my readers.
When you're creating a world, a lot of times it's the dystopian elements that sort of drive a story forward. So when you're building a utopian world, what are the kind of action elements or things that happen that are going to drive the story?
That's a great question because that was one of the hardest things to deal with creating a utopian society. If you have a true utopian society, you really have no conflict going on. So you don't have much of a story there. It's all just about a setting. So what I ended up doing was I had the humanity of Earth get involved. And so sometimes you have some problems when humans get involved in things. And obviously we did here as well. So I used the connection between Pangea. And for those of you who don't remember what Pangea is, it might just, tickle a feather in the back of your brain that you've heard it before, but you don't remember what it was. It was the land mass on Earth prior to the tectonic plates moving apart and creating the continents. So it was Earth very, very early in its development. So in my world, there were people living on Pangea during this time. There were humans and there were Pangeans. And so when the continents broke up, it was because of a magical force that the Pangeans had discovered, and they broke it away from Earth. So they had two different worlds. One is Earth that we know that evolved the way that we know it, and the other one, slightly out of phase, is Pangea. So the two worlds are connected but separate, but they still have to deal with each other. Well, Pangeans really have to deal with Earth. Humans don't know much about Pangea being there. Only a few of them did, and those few were the ones that caused the problems.
Yes, not too shocking. Probably members of Congress.
Very close, very close.
All right. So when you're world building, how do you tie your world back to story? And we talked about this a little bit, but specifically, we put a lot of time in world building, and most people who read it don't know how much of the world is really developed. How do you tie it back to the story to make it a good story, but at the same time share your world?
Well, that was also something hard to do. This entire project was very challenging, but very rewarding as well, because it's like this huge puzzle that you have to figure out, and it keeps morphing into other things as you're trying to figure it out. There's always more and more and more to add. So one of the things I did in my previous books, The Minstrel's Tale, which are medieval historical fiction for kids, is I used the story within a story element, and that worked really well. A lot of people seem to enjoy that. So I did that in Pangea as well. I used giving the history of the world and the technology of the world. A lot of that was done in a story within a story atmosphere. So it wasn't an info dump that was just dumped on the reader. Here's all the things you need to know. It was discovered as you go, as my main character, Mia, is discovering this. And a lot of it, she's discovering it through stories from her mother and from her father and from other people that are in that world. So some of it she discovers quite by accident, which is a lot of fun when that happens. But the history of it and the whys and the wherefores and how this world is uniquely different, that came through story. So that was the way that I handled it, because I just didn't want that. I read some books, some fantasy books by some writers, and I won't mention any names, but you had this huge info dump in the beginning of the book, and because you didn't discover it organically as you were reading, it was too much to take in, and a lot of times it didn't make sense as you were reading. You'd forget a lot of that, especially if you had to put the book down and take a break before you got into the actual story elements of the story. So I liked it better when it's organically combined into the story. Does that make sense?
Oh, perfectly. I know, it's one of my arguments about why people should read more fiction instead of just reading a bunch of nonfiction books is because, or good nonfiction books too, are story-based. And the reason mythologies were stories was so you could remember the point of it. And you lose it when it's more of an info dump or a checklist of 1422, this invasion happened, and this happened, and this happened, and it becomes like a bad history class.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. And that was, yeah. So the way I avoided that was the stories within a story, because that gives the reader a little bit of context, and it lets my character have enough context to go into that world and ask the questions that she needed to ask and that the reader wants to know as well. So that was fun to do that. And I like the story within a story. I liked it in The Minstrel's Tale. I like it in this. And I don't know, that might just end up turning out to be my trademark or something. I don't know.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good trademark to me. The more stories, the better. However, there are certain people who do really like encyclopedic view of fantasy worlds. So do you put some of that material up on your website as sort of kind of a behind the scenes for the world? Or is that just something that you share through your stories?
Yeah, I haven't put anything like that up on my website. That's a good idea. I might do that. No, I've just really done it through the stories, but it would be kind of fun to do a little bit of the history and stuff of the world right there in the website, without giving away any spoilers. That might be a little hard to do, so I might have to do some research on that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the most difficult part is, where do you stop the line? What are the things you want to talk about when you share it in that form? Because one, you don't want to give away the story because you don't want to, ruin that part of it. So is it leading up to the story or what's a good balance for that? I think is a great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll look into that. That's a neat idea.
Well, hit me up on Twitter if you ever want to chat about it. It's an obsession of mine.
All right, thanks.
If you haven't noticed, I like talking about world building and how to present it.
Yeah. Well, I love your program. I've learned a lot from it. I wish I had known about it before I started writing Pangea 3 years ago. That would have been extremely helpful. So anybody that's just getting into fantasy, they should definitely give your program and your listen to and your newsletters.
Yes.
Sign up for the newsletter.
Oh no, I appreciate that. And I kind of agree because I think if nothing else, even if you're proficient at it, it's always good sometimes to rethink the way you look at cultures and races. And even if you don't end up using what other people come up with, it's inspiration is all around us in the world, whether it's from other people who work in the genre or it's in National Geographic. It's all over the place. So it's important to experience stuff and especially stuff with varied opinion, because that's really what, the collaboration to me is the best part.
I agree. I agree.
Awesome. Well, let's get back to you then. Okay, well, when did you know that you had a love for world building?
I knew when I realized that the world building, the setting of the world that you're building is a character in your story. And it's just as much of a character as your protagonist and your antagonist. It's that amount of, you need to know that world just as well as you know what your characters are going to be doing and why they would do it and what their motivations are. So you have that entire motivation for the world. So I knew that I would love it because I love building those characters and creating those characters and getting to know them. And so this was just that on a more massive scale. It was getting to know this world, walking in this world, meeting the people in this world. And that to me it's what writing's all about, meeting the characters, helping them, figure out how they're going to solve their problems and things like that. And it was the same thing, just on a much grander scale when you're building a world.
Now I have to ask here, and it's slightly related back to actually the previous question, but the main character of the book, is it a Pangean or a human?
Well, she starts out as a human and then finds out that she is Pangean. And there's a reason that she was on Earth for the first 20 years of her life, which she doesn't really quite understand all that was required for that until almost the end of the book, is when that really gets hit home to her, why she was kind of abandoned on Earth, which she really wasn't abandoned, but she sort of felt that way from time to time.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a common feeling for people to have. Sometimes we always feel isolated.
Yes, and I think it was actually a secret wish to find out that I'm really Pangean and I was just abandoned here.
Well, I wanted to be an orc, so I guess it's not quite as utopian, but hey, good enough. So tell me, what was your I Can experience? There are a lot of people I know who are very creative. Some can write, some can present the information in a different way. But what was your I Can moment where you're like, you know what? I can do more than just make this up. I can share it. What brought you to that point?
Well, that's another great question, because I wanted to be a writer as soon as I read The Hobbit back in 6th grade. That world just drew me in like almost no other book had ever done. And I had the same experience when I read Harry Potter years later. I was still trying to be a writer, but hadn't quite ever finished anything. I kept trying to write these stories, but I have a very bad case of ADHD. And so if the story didn't capture me and hold my attention, if I couldn't get it done in time for it to hold my attention, I was on to another idea and writing another story and never actually finished one. So back a few years ago, and very few years ago, actually, I was in my 40s, when my daughter, who was a magazine editor at the time, said, "Mom, stop trying to write the great American novel and just write a short story. Just learn the craft." Well, I wasn't a big short story fan. I didn't read them for entertainment. I like the immersive novels that you just fall into and don't come back out of. So that's what I wanted to write. So I did take her advice, though, and I started writing fairy tales. And once I finished that first fairy tale, that was my I Can moment. That was the moment when I realized I can create a story, I can take it through to the end, I can finish it. So then that became quite addicting. I wrote over 30 fairy tales within less than a month. It was just a couple of weeks. Then, because I still wanted that immersive world, I took those fairy tales and put them into a novel. And what I did was I used a minstrel to tell those stories. So that's where the stories within a story comes from. But that was back in medieval England and France, back during the 100 Years' War, the Peasants' Revolt, and all of that stuff was going on. So there's some real history in there, but the fairy tales are in there just as well, kind of along the lines of 1001 Arabian Nights, which was also one of my favorite books when I was growing up, and had the stories within a story motif going on.
That's where it interested. So it was historical fiction, but it had fantasy elements worked into it. Good.
Correct. Yeah, with all the little fairy tales. But that was my I Can. It was simply finishing something for the first time ever, and knowing that I could, knowing that I knew how to take a story and have the characters and go from beginning to end. That was huge for me. I mean, you have no idea if ADHD and you're jumping all over the place to finally settle down and do something that you love and be able to continue to take it all the way to the end. That was big for me. So I owe my daughter a lot for that little piece of advice.
Now, I just wonder, I don't know if there's ever been a study done on this or not, but a lot of the world builders I know, if they're not ADHD, they have a lot of those tendencies where unless you're interested in something, it's very, very hard to focus. I think it's one of the things that makes us want to go out and learn about other cultures and then how to make them because, and I don't know if there's any truth to that or not, but it's something that's always swam in the back of my mind, just wondering if part of my inability to focus on things that bored me led me to have a wide range of interest, which allowed me to start world building. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great theory because as a reader, my taste in literature and nonfiction is just as eclectic. And I'm not a genre reader. I don't read all romance or all mystery or all sci-fi or all fantasy. I read everything. I mean, I just finished Salt, A History of the World, which was a fascinating book. And I love that kind of stuff. I seem to can't get enough of it. You know, I'll read a book on quantum physics followed up by a book on salt or a book on, or a Stephen King novel from ages ago that I happened to have missed, which was his fantasy book, Through a Dragon's Eyes, which was pretty cool. So yeah, I think that ADHD, what it does for me as a reader is gives me that scope, that huge scope of taking a little bit from here and there. Probably does the same thing for us as writers. I think you've got some truth in that theory, for sure. Do you know that one of the things that I've noticed is those worlds that I get lost in, and we're talking here like Tolkien's world and the Harry Potter books and Dune and those type of worlds that they just take you and you get lost in there for a while. One of the things that I've noticed is that I really don't care so much about the characters after the first or second book. The characters, I mean, after the third book in Harry Potter, I was like, all right, I'm done with Harry. I want to go on and see what else is going on in this world. And I was very upset that J.K. Rowling didn't take me there. I wanted to go there. Same thing with Star Trek. I love the people on the Enterprise and God rest Leonard Nimoy. I miss him already. But I wanted to go to other places without them for a while and see what was going on. I wanted to be on the Borg ship for a while and see what it was like to be a Borg without the card being there. I think the world building called to me more than the characters did.
I think that's a great truth too, especially with shows like Star Trek. They start off in the exploration phase, and then they start doing diplomacy, and when they reached that part, I started to get a little more bored. I liked it when they were hitting a new planet I can see why that'd be very hard to write a TV show like that, but
Oh, I think it would be impossible. And Firefly is another one, and I still can't believe they took that off the air so quick. But love that show. Would have loved to have stayed in that world and visited more of those places.
Yes, no, Firefly. Yeah, I'm gonna cry.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, what would you say your biggest achievement to date is? Now, this isn't necessarily about writing or world building. This is just in general. What's your biggest achievement?
I think the biggest achievement was, well, they go together. When we opened up the bookstore, which was back in 2008, I was still trying to become a writer. And by opening up the bookstore, what that allowed me to do was meet so many different authors when we hold author signings here. I get to talk with these authors on a really personal basis for sometimes a couple hours at a time, because unfortunately, when you're an indie author, a lot of people don't show up to your book signings because they don't know about you. And when you're a new bookstore, a lot of people don't know you're there either. So we had plenty of time to talk, and I was able to just pick the minds of some very creative individuals in the early years of starting this bookstore. And so being able to cross into my own writing at the same time as having a bookstore, I think was a huge benefit for me. And I wouldn't have had that had we not opened the bookstore. I don't think I would have had that. I'm not the type that would go out and seek out writers groups to join. That's just not who I am. But when we have them here at my bookstore, I kind of have to be here because I'm the host for them. And so we do have a lot of writers groups and writers workshops that take place here. And I still learn from writers every single day. Just Wednesday, we had an author signing in here and got to learn a lot from her. So it's I would say my biggest achievement has been the bookstore and keeping it open, which in this day and age, that's an achievement in and of itself. Um, and and getting the writing, actually getting some books finished, getting them out there for sale, seeing the reviews on it. My guilty author secret is as soon as I start to feel self-conscious about my writing is I'll go on and read my reviews. And it's kind of fun to do that. So reviews, if you love the work of some author, leave them a review because you don't know how much that might help them in their times of self-doubt. And those times of self-doubt for an author are almost every day.
Well, and the thing people don't realize too, and this goes the same for podcasting, which is why it's important to review podcasts as well. But podcast and books, the visibility is helped out when people actually write reviews. So it makes them a little more accessible in Amazon and iTunes. And the best thing you can do to anyone is, if you pay or not for their content, is to take the time, because even if it's not a 5-star, I think it's the best thing I ever read. It gives the critique of who's reading your material or consuming it. It gives it back to you so you can actually do a better job in the future.
I agree. Even a review that isn't necessarily a 5-star, if it's a well-written review that tells you why it wasn't a 5-star, then you can definitely glean something from that. There have been, I have one bad review on a 1-star review on The Minstrel's Tale, which is kind of strange because all it says is, I thought Divergent would be different, and I don't know what that means. So that review is kind of, messing with me because I have nothing to do with Divergent in that book. So
yeah, do you mean the book Divergent?
I don't know what they meant. I have no idea what they meant.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess that can happen too, but very interesting, Divergent. I don't think that was medieval historical fiction either.
I don't think.
I've not read that one, but okay. Now, what real-world advice do you wish you could have told yourself sooner?
That same advice that my daughter gave me. I really wish she'd have just told me to finish something, and that would have worked for me outside of writing. I mean, this ADHD isn't just confined to the writing world, unfortunately. The part of ADHD that I love is my mind is constantly moving and going. And I think ADHD, I'm not one who believes you need to be medicated for it. I think you need to know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are and set yourself up to succeed by getting tools to help you with your weaknesses. And so Siri on my iPhone has been a huge help for me lately with things. I wish I'd had that back when I was in school, and that would have been very nice. But yes, the same thing, just finishing what you start. That would have been very helpful. And I had that advice from billions of people growing up, where you just finish something, but never had it in writing, which is something that I desperately, desperately wanted to do and had tried so hard to do. So
that's awesome.
I wish I had listened to the advice earlier. Yeah.
Well, I think too, it also sometimes for us, it's the right time and right place to hear the same advice that we've been given for a long time.
Definitely.
But, if you could go back and tell yourself all of the things to make your life better, I guess it would be easier life and maybe more boring.
That could be, yeah.
Could you just give us a quick story about a task you could have done to have got started sooner as a writer?
I wish I'd have known about flash fiction sooner. I think that really helps you grow as a writer in getting things. When you build a world, your book tends to grow huge because there's so much information that the reader needs. So fantasy and sci-fi books are usually longer than, the 75,000, 80,000 words for most other fiction books because of that. So starting to write the flash fiction, which are extremely short stories, helps you to focus in on exactly what it is you want to say in the fewest amount of words and get the point across quicker, which I think is helpful for any writer. And I wish I'd have started that sooner. I just got into flash fiction just a few years ago, and I think it helped me keep Pangea to 460 pages instead of it being, a 900-page novel. But it would have been a nice way to learn how to finish a story quicker as well. So it could have helped in so many different ways.
And there's the thing that writers or people who are storytellers could take advantage of too in a flash fiction setting is it gives you a chance, if you want to talk about parts of the world that you didn't get to, or if you want to talk about a specific thing that you couldn't talk about because it didn't make sense for your novel, it's a great way, it's a great avenue to do that, whether it's a serial or just a bunch of one-shots around your world to help explain the world in a slightly different context. I mean, I think flash fiction I think you're going to see a lot more flash fiction and probably novellas coming out over the next 10 years. I think part of it, too, the people's reading spans are, I think, are starting to shorten a bit as well.
I agree. And I think I like that idea, too. And I never even thought about it until we were just talking here. But doing flash fiction on Pangea is like, writing fan fiction on your own world would be kind of a fun thing to do. And that's easy to put up on social media.
Yeah. The great free giveaways, too, to help maybe get them to buy the novel, too, is, here's some experiences with my writing. If you enjoy it, go get the full thing, and pay me for it, please.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. See, this is definitely worthwhile. I've got 2 great ideas already from it.
That's awesome. This is the best part for me, too, because I get to learn so much. I've only started doing the interviews. I've done, just a handful at this point, but each one, I get to learn something, and like I said, collaboration is the great strength of humans.
It is. And Pangeans, by the way.
And Pangeans, excellent. But luckily, they're not quite as naughty as us humans. All right. Now we're about to enter the gauntlet round. And the gauntlet round is where I like to torture writers who like to use lots of words by making them answer things quickly. So are you ready to go?
All right, give me a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. What held you back from sharing your world?
Oh, fear. Terrified to share it with people.
Okay. Favorite types of fantasy world? Alien, Earth-like, or Earth-based?
Earth-like. Although the medieval, Earth-like.
What is your favorite time period for fantasy setting?
Well, I definitely love the medieval time setting, which is where most of them are set. But I also love just something else different, It's not necessarily, and it could be anything as long as it's not medieval.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I like medieval and not medieval. So
you like fantasy. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's like one of the most fun stories I actually ever told. This was orally presented to my friends. Actually, it was in a role-playing game. It was sort of a off-world Western style fantasy. It was something that no one had ever really done before. It was a lot of fun.
That would be fun.
Yeah. No, there's neat things in every time period. And that's why I also say Star Wars is really fantasy and not science fiction.
I agree.
Excellent. What is the most important habit or skill in creating a world?
I think getting into the habit of asking what if, how, why, the questions for world building. It seems unending, but every time you make one adjustment, there are so many repercussions. It's like a domino effect. And so you have to constantly be questioning. So if I do this, then what happens? And what if, and why would they do this? And that led to some really interesting things on Pangea that I was not expecting, which is what turned it into an adult book instead of a children's book.
Yes.
It started out as a book for all ages. And because of the way that their world developed, it was definitely more fun to go down the other road. So,
hey, sometimes you have to go with the story too,
Yes.
So, what tool or tools could you not work without?
Oh, a laptop. I couldn't do anything without a laptop. I can't even think without my fingers on a keyboard these days.
Well, you're actually not the first person who's given me that response. So. What is one resource you would offer to a world builder starting down your path?
Well, I want to give you 2 here. The first thing I would offer anybody who wants to build worlds and be a writer is just a fabulous library of sci-fi and fantasy. Read all you can first and foremost. And then the second thing is a site like yours that gives interviews with authors who are doing this, and the map tips that you've got and all the tips that you gave in your podcasts about the things that you need to think about. I wish I'd have had that 3 years ago. Like I said, that would have been extremely helpful. I learned a lot of this by trial and error, which is probably why it took 3 years to get Pangea done. I think the stuff that you have on your podcast, I could have finished it in, a year and a half the time.
There's the thing I think about that too, is going back to your other answer about what if questions. sometimes if you only learn one new thing to ask yourself when you're world building, it leads you to all kinds of new interesting things on your own. So that's why I love the brainstorming part of it.
Yeah, I do too. And Tom and I, we sat around every night and did the brainstorming. He was a huge part of this. He's the J in AJ Questerly, actually. So it was great to brainstorm with someone else. So if you have, someone in your life that's living in that world with you that you can have some fun with it over a couple glasses of wine, it's a great experience. You almost never want to end. Maybe that's why it took 3 years. I don't know, really.
Wine or caffeine are two wonderful things in world building. Okay.
Yes, they are.
If you ended up in the world you created, what would be the first thing you would do?
Oh, I would get one of their sage bracelets. Their sage bracelets are the way that the Pangeans, it's kind of like Siri on steroids. But they also have virtual clothes there. So, no laundry in this world, because you can't have utopia if you have to do laundry. That just goes without saying. So yeah, I would, because once you have that bracelet, you have access to all the knowledge that you need, everything that you need, how to get around, and everything else. So I'd definitely grab onto one of those bracelets when I first got there. And then I'd go pet the unicorns, because unicorns are fun.
Well, to be honest, at this point, after hearing more about your world, I think I'd rather visit there than one of mine. I don't consider them dystopian, but yours sounds a little more friendly.
What's really funny? What's really funny is I checked the title Pangea before I published it a couple months ago. And there was no fantasy, utopian, dystopian, anything with Pangea. A lot of Pangea stuff was nonfiction. Well, then it came out January 24th. And as I put the book up, I noticed there's another Pangea that just came out in December.
Oh, wow.
It's dystopian. So, of course, I had to read it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. The story was great. It's not a world I want to live in because it's too much like this one is going towards. But it was really interesting to see how another author took that same word and turned it into something completely different. It was a good story. So if you like dystopian, there's a dystopian Pangea too.
That's right. So go either dystopian or definitely go utopian today. It would actually be a wonderful panel at a conference somewhere to have both of you explaining your worlds at the same time.
It would. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And just the timing just makes it just priceless. All right.
It does.
Well, Anna, I would like to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interview you today. Are there what are some other ways people can get in contact with you on the internet?
Well, I've been trying all sorts of social media because I'm really not very good at it. So I'm on everything pretty much, but not a huge presence on any one, and I kind of check in on them from time to time. So I'm on Twitter, and it's the @ Anna Questerly. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Goodreads, and just started with Goodreads as an author. So I have an author page there. And that's probably a pretty cool way, if you're on Goodreads, to touch base with me because it updates my blog as well. So you can get on my blog at annaquesterly.com and check out, signings I'm going to be at and stuff like that. If you are in Arizona, next week is the 4th biggest book festival in the U.S. down in Tucson. It's called the Tucson Festival of Books. And I'll be there signing at the Arizona Dreams booth, which is number 106, with about 30 other amazing authors. So I'm so excited to be there. So that's on Pi Day and the Ides of March. So next weekend, Saturday and Sunday.
Well, be careful. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And just to let everyone know who's listening, I'll put links to all the ways to contact Anna. Anything that I can find in the episode that we were talking about, try and put links up on the show notes on garduel.com. And now, go out there, go right now to Amazon, find Pangea, the Utopian version by AJ Questerly, buy it, and review it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for having me on.
It was a pleasure. It was great meeting you.
Have a great day.
And as always, make sure to go to garduel.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes And please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardual.com to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.